Okay, I just want to explain this. Okay, I didn't explain it too clearly, so I want to explain it again. Just the hierarchy of feudalism. Okay, king. Okay, we had king. Okay, below the king you had lords. You had noblemen. Now the class of noblemen would be lords, who's a little bit higher, and then under that would be the vassals. Now from this category, these are your nobles. Okay. The king would give like a fief, which is a contract. Let's just say it was, the name originated. It would give the contract to the land to the lords, and the lord would have vassals. From these vassals, usually is where your knights came from. And then underneath these lords and vassals were your serfs. Okay? Okay, does that make sense now? So when you talk about noblemen, noblemen are not kings, although I guess you could call kings noblemen. But it's the king that's up there. He would give a fief to a lord. The lord would organize his vassals, who would be his supervisors on the territory. But these are both noble positions. And then under that would be the serfs. And then outside of this would be your priest. Your priest would be over the manor that you would live in. Okay? I think that clears that up for you. So king, lords, vassals, serfs. Lords just a little bit higher than vassals. And your knights come from this noble class of people. Serfs were not made knights. A serf was a serf always. Okay, so let's move on here. We're going to talk about now the Crusades, which is really probably one of the... there's two elements, okay? If you want to talk dualism, we can talk dualism a little bit here. In this kind of way. Christendom, which not is confused with Christianity. Christendom is a word that we use to define culture that is sort of controlled, culture that is sort of ruled maybe by Christian principles. Okay, it's not bad, but it also can be, okay, I'll fix this, okay, good, this is, okay, we'll just draw this a little bit, okay, and just some roots, okay, and make that like, I'm not quite as good at Pastor Schaller, but not bad. Okay, so that's a tree. Okay, I'm going somewhere with this. What do you think, Isaiah? What do you think? What do you think of my drawing, Isaiah? Isaiah likes it. Okay, so... Oh, sorry, his eyes are closed. He doesn't see it. Oh, geez, you're too perceptive for me. All right, thank you. Only a woman would notice that. His eyes are closed. Okay, all right. Culture ruled by Christians. Okay, over here. Good. Good, but good side of the tree. Let's just think this is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And then I guess you could put, you could put Islam over here too. This is, we would say that maybe it's not as this, but it's also a religious system. And these systems are both battling on the good side of the tree for world control. Christendom, the idea, the Pope really had settled himself on a throne in Rome, and really the kings had paid homage to him. But Christendom and Islam were both fighting from the good side of the tree. Which gets its root from the evil side of the tree. And so, it doesn't really matter. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And Islam is a religious system, and Christendom, as it was dominated by the church in Rome, was a religious system. And so the Crusades really mark this war between two, seemingly human good systems, right? And that's really what the whole idea of the Crusades was about. The territory, the holy territory where Jesus walked, is being controlled by Islam, by people who are not Christian. And that was Christ's territory, so we're going to take Christ's territory back. So they were going to war. Christendom was going to war against the culture that wanted to be ruled by Muhammad, or the Quran. And this is still the same. Do not be deceived. Do not be deceived. You read the Quran, The Quran really is built upon establishing a world order based on itself, okay, on the writings of Muhammad. And we talked about this last week. Unlike other religions, Islam is one of those religions which one man got one revelation and no one else heard it. The Bible is not that way. We have one revelation heard by 40 different people, at least. 40 different people, at least, heard the revelation of God, and it became Scripture for us. The Quran is the product of a revelation from an angel, the angel Gabriel, to one man. So, angels of light speaking to people. And so, good side of the tree, although we know that there is some Islam that has moved over to this side. You know, one man has already said that Islam, Muslims everywhere should copy what the guy, what the shooter did in Fort Hood. And he's telling good Muslims should do that. That's what a good Muslim would do. A good Muslim would attack the infidels that way. So that's kind of interesting. But right now the Crusades represent this warring between these two religious systems that want to dominate the world. Okay. So how did they do this? Really, this is Bernard of Clairvaux, who really, if you read some of his writings, he had some, a spiritual element to him, and he preached the crusade, the need to go after this territory. And that's really this is what we're talking about, this territory. And this was the result of some of the Crusades. This territory was taken back from the Muslims for a season. And you could see there, and that's where it is in the world. Here is Europe up here, and they would come down here. They'd invaded this territory. Armenia is a Christian area, but these areas would become down here. This is what's now Lebanon. Up here is Syria, part of Turkey, and in there. And this remains part of the Byzantine Empire. But this was what the Crusades were about. Okay, the Crusades began in 1095. Okay, and this is under Pope Urban. Pope Urban the Second. He decided that this was going to be a holy. He was the first to promote the holy wars from taking this territory back from the Saracens. Okay, which is another name. Saracens is also a name for this. There was two sort of groups. There was an Arabian-led wave of Muslim conquest that happened, and then there was also this Turkish way. The Turks that came after that. The Turks were more forceful, more aggressive, more brutal, maybe in some cases, and but this is what they're referred to. You will receive this sometime. So Pope Urban, suggested that this begin. Pilgrimages to holy places were important, but while the Muslims controlled this area in Jerusalem, it was impossible for a Christian to get there. And that was, a big thing to do. We know the Muslims, that's one of their 5 points of being a good Muslim, is to make a pilgrimage to Mecca in Saudi Arabia, to see this place where it all began, where the Prophet Muhammad received his revelation, to get to that place, supposedly, where it all happened, and his first territory of authority in Saudi Arabia. And as well, Christians wanted to go to Jerusalem to stand on the sands where Jesus walked. That kind of thing. They wanted to stand on those places where Jesus walked. So Pope Urban, started stirring up this idea. And if you are under the feudal system and you're thinking about wild adventure and you're living a certain kind of life, who do you think first responded to this call to go on the Crusades? The serfs. The serfs. You just think about it. Let's go back here. You can't get into the castle. You're living like that. That's the way you're living. The priest in the parish comes out. And says, there's a new adventure. How would you like to take a Holy Land tour? Would you like to get off the farm for a while? Would you like to get off the farm for a while? You can go on a Holy Land tour. A monk, a hermit, came out. He was a monk. He came out and started to preach to the peasants about going to the Holy Land. You'll have to fight, but you could get there and be where Jesus was. And if you find a piece of territory, you could stay there. And people did stay there. So the first Crusades really was a peasant crusade. Now this is what was awaiting them. Not something very pleasant for them. And these were not your knights. These were not your trained warriors. The first one, this is really before the first official, it was about 15,000 serfs decided to head to the Holy Land with the blessing of the Roman Catholic Church. Go ahead and do it. Just one problem, they weren't warriors. And as you can see, you needed to be a warrior. And this group of people were routed. They were routed, and they were left, their bones were left to bleach in the sun as a warning to other crusaders. So the farmers marched to defeat, and they were, ruthlessly crushed. So the peasant crusade was the first crusade, and it was a failure. It was a failure. So, that didn't stop the church. That didn't stop the church. After this, the first official crusade came from 1096 until about 1099, about 3 years, and they marched down into that. And this was 50,000 people on this crusade, including 4,500 knights. So this was much more successful this time. 50,000, 4,500 knights. The first thing they did was they took Constantinople, which was kind of interesting. They went over there and they took that back. That was still under the Byzantine control, so it was really like the Roman Church was trying to exercise some authority over the Eastern Church at that time. And then they did that, and then they moved to Jerusalem, and they retook Jerusalem, and it's famous for its brutality. Okay, it was a brutal. These are mercenaries. Okay, you know what a mercenary is? They are hired fighter, mercenary people. They weren't really concerned with the chivalrous kind of. That's why I say chivalry. Was it ever really alive? They said, is chivalry dead? These mercenary people killed women, children, babies in retaking Jerusalem. So this really is still, if you're wondering about the roots of jihad, really the roots of jihad go back to this. These people really cannot give up a 1,000-year grudge that they're holding. If you wonder why they hate Christians so much and why some of them do what they do to us, this is why. Really, it goes back to this crusade and the way these men, these Christian men, treated the conquered people of Jerusalem, and the brutality that was exercised there. So the crusade, our team used to be, I think for a season, our sports teams here were called Crusaders because we got free jerseys, and they had Crusaders, and then we found out just how wicked these people were. Oh no, we're the Eagles. We're now the Eagles. We want to be high. We don't want to be Crusaders. And it's kind of, but it's, it's interesting. It wasn't you hear, when we talk about it in a couple minutes, I'll talk about the story of Richard the Lionheart, and, that's kind of the whole King Arthur legend is sort of built on the idea of Richard the King and the Lionheart and the whole Robin Hood stuff. That's all based on King Richard and his big heart for this. And it's interesting, he may have been the noblest crusader, and we'll see how that worked out, when that all worked out. But this was crusade number 1, and they managed to retake they managed to retake all of this territory, and they set up this country and this principality, this county, and then the kingdom of Jerusalem, these 4 little territories. There's just a problem here. They're not easily defended territories. You got the sea here, and then all of this is wide open. There's not mountains here to keep people back or to keep the the people you kicked out, the Muslims, back from this. So within a couple of years, 1144, the Muslims retook this northernmost part. They took this country of Edessa back. That was taken back very quickly. And, but the Pope at that time decided he was going to do it again. Let's have another crusade. That first crusade was successful. It created 4 little kingdoms. They were the knights of the Crusades got to stay here and live in these territories, and so they got land. So knights who were really vassals serving lords who were serving kings, and peasants, made their way to this territory, thought, okay, adventure, blood and guts, but land could be mine in a tropical climate, a warmer climate than where I'm living. So it was appealing to some people. So the Second Crusade was really, was motivated by this man, Bernard of Clairvaux. This is him holding up these things and appealing to the lords and the knights, to fund this operation and the kings. And but this next one was not successful at all. The Muslim armies had grown even stronger during this period of time, and so they attempted to take back. So after the Muslims retake Muslim retake part of the territory conquered in the First Crusade, the next crusade came at 1147. In 1147 to 1149, this Second Crusade happened. This Bernard of Clairvaux had a great influence on the two kings of France and Germany, and they led the crusade. But the army, the German army, was defeated even before it reached the Holy Land. Before they reached that territory, they were defeated north of the territory, and the French assault in Damascus also failed. And then the Muslims grew stronger and stronger. And then in 1187, Saladin became the leader from Egypt. Saladin of Egypt became the leader of this united force of Islam, and he retook Jerusalem. Jerusalem was retaken. So any gains that they made in that first crusade, you see, were gone within 100 years. And that's really, when the flesh is the flesh, and when it's exercised, it usually, you could see there's the idea. This is what they were going through, that kind of, this is what it looked like. These are your Christian crusaders, these are your Muslim defenders, and this is the kind of warfare that's going on there. Thousands of people. So it wasn't for the faint of heart, obviously. This is Richard the Lionheart. He is the next crusade that comes. After Saladin retook Jerusalem, small pieces of the territory along the coast remained in control of some of the Crusader knights, but for the most part, things were back to the way they were. Now the next crusade, crusade number 3, the Third Crusade. This is the one that Richard the Lionheart would lead. This was the Crusade of Kings. The German king, Frederick, King Frederick of Germany, Barbarossa Frederick of Germany. So the German king was Frederick. He was going to lead his army. Frederick, and then we had Philip Augustus of France. So he was going to lead his army also there. And then England, Britain, is Richard the Lionheart. This was the Crusade of Kings. So Richard was, so this was very well orchestrated by the Pope at that time. And, it did result in a measure of success. Richard the Lionheart was well respected by Saladin. Saladin gave him horses when he saw Richard the Lionheart fighting on his feet by himself. There was a great respect between Richard the Lionheart and Saladin, and it did result in something. Frederick Barbarossa, leading his army, fell into a pond and drowned. And how did that happen? A pond. Well, you saw the kind of armor they wore. You just sink right to the bottom. That's it, he drowned before he got there, so the German army never really got to the battlefield in the Middle East. And, Richard the Lionheart was left to fight with whatever, French troops. And the French troops also turned back. They had a small victory in the north part, and then they decided that was enough for them, and they went home. And then Richard the Lionheart kept fighting, and he eventually reached an agreement. He reached an agreement that would control some of the coastal cities that the Crusader Crusader knights had thing, and he managed to get a passageway to Jerusalem for any pilgrim that wanted to be there. So Saladin is a famous figure in Muslim. This is Richard the Lionheart again there with the cross on his thing there. This is a picture of Saladin of Egypt. Great warrior, honorable warrior. This is a picture of him in Jordan, in a city in Jordan. This is not a picture, but a sculpture of him in Jordan. So he's still fairly famous as a hero throughout the Muslim territory. You can see that. Almost looks sort of like Attila the Hun a little bit. And I'm sure that his fighting practices were just as aggressive for the most part. And he built like this castle here. As the remnants of this are still, his castle is still there in Cairo, Egypt there. But he had here's a meeting between, this is a rendering of a meeting between, this is Saladin and this is Richard the Lionheart. They had great respect for each other. So Saladin was the king of the territory, really, the leader of the Muslims, and this crusade did result in that little bit of, accommodation that, and Richard went home really after securing that right of pilgrims to go to Jerusalem. Okay, so we go back to this. That's the third crusade. The fourth crusade, 1202. 1202, there's a fourth crusade that's organized, and it never really reaches. It was really just organized using professional soldiers, mercenaries. This crusade, mercenaries, they never really reached the Holy Land. Instead, what they did, they wound up in Constantinople, that city that's now Istanbul in Turkey, and they raided that. It's like they just decided to plunder that. They spent several days plundering that. Yes?
What was the year for the Third Crusade?
Oh, Third Crusade. This would be 1189 to 1192. And this next one came in 1202 to 1204. And all these professional soldiers did. They got to a nice city. They saw there was a lot of wine, women, and song there, and they just plundered it. Why should we go down there, fight Saladin and the forces? Those forces, Saladin is gone by then. But, why should we go down there and fight those forces? Forget that. We'll just take what we can here. And, that's what happens when you have professional fighters. Usually they just take the easiest course there. They're not fighting for honor or anything there. Okay, so that happened there. In 1202, this isn't really classified as a crusade, but it is, I guess, in some measures. This is Richard the Lionheart's grave. This is in France somewhere, right? I think, Sebastian, right? Have you been to this place? No? Okay. It's somewhere in France. He left England and went to the continent and had himself buried there. Okay. The next sort of tragic thing to think about is in 1212, 30,000 teenagers, 12 to 15-year-olds. Okay. Now this is one of the most tragic stories of the Crusade era. Their innocence, they were they were convinced by someone that their innocence and purity would open the Mediterranean Sea for them, and they would be able to march through and conquer the Holy Land where they hadn't, where the other men could not conquer the Holy Land. So they marched from France. They marched to the Alps. Now 12 to 14-year-olds, and a lot of them didn't know what they were doing in the mountains. They died. They died. Some went home, and others were captured by the Muslims and became slaves in Muslim households along the Mediterranean Sea. So they were tricked by slave traders into becoming that, and they were sold into slavery. So that happened twice. The same year, 20,000 German children did the same thing, and they also, 20,000. These were 20,000 children from France, and then the same year, this is about 12, that same year, 20,000 from Germany tried to do the same thing. And that's what they said, our purity. They were led by, children. It was like 14-year-old was their leader, and, the adults at the time let them go. Don't worry, Isaiah, I will not do that to you. Okay. You will not be a part of any kind of children's crusade. Okay, so, just promise you that as your grandfather. That's okay. I hope you're enjoying this class. If you're on the DVD, that's just, but, if you've never been a grandfather, I highly recommend it. Get married, have children, let your children grow up, and let them get married and have children. It's amazing. God bless you if it happens that way. Okay, all right. So, where are we? Okay, so the German children, they marched into the other thing. There were other little small crusades, but during the 13th century, the 1200s, but they achieved nothing. And by 1291, everything was back to Muslim control. Muslim controlled the Holy Land again, and that was the end of that. And this was really, if you want to look at a turning point in the church authority in terms of Europe, this is it. This is where it happened right here. When the Muslims retook this land again, people began to think, are these men who are ruling us really of God? Because children have died, peasants have died, many of our best knights have been killed in these holy enterprises, and they haven't accomplished the things that you told us God sent us to do. And so now the questions start. And the Crusades did accomplish something important. They really enabled the path to the Orient to be reopened up. The path to the Orient of, and the silk and the trading that went through there. So after the wars were fought, there were connections that were made between the Crusaders and the Islamic occupiers, or the people who were living in the territory at the time. And this really is the beginning of what will be the next stage of our history. 1291, the church in Rome is losing its influence. Islam is there, but also there is these business arrangements begin to be made. The love of money is the root of all evil, right? And the love of money is starting to make an impact in people's lives. Hey, you can be Muslim and I can be whatever I am. I can be, Roman Catholic, and we can have a business, and we can trade, and we can make a lot of money. And that's really what started to happen. And the thing that it did was, the authority of the church at Rome, now remember this. This is the other hierarchy. Maybe I haven't really explained this as well as I should, so I will right now. But Rome, you had Rome. This is where your Pope is. He's the supreme authority of the Catholic Church. Underneath that, you have your synods. That was really like, something, it was a larger territory. Those territories were broken down into dioceses, and then the dioceses had the small parishes, the church, parishes. So and these were like the territories. So it would be like, and it was geographical. The synods were broken down by geography. The dioceses were little divisions in the synods, and then the parishes were the individual churches that were in the different places. The Pope had already done away with a practice that was called lay investiture. Let me write that for you. You'll see this term maybe if you read a church history book. Lay investiture. You'll see this. What this means was that the king would lay his hands on the parish priests that came into his territories. Now the popes had gotten rid of that, and now they were assigning the priests directly from their seat atop the church structure. So the pope would communicate to the synod would communicate to the diocese, and the diocese would get the priest in the parish. And so this was it. It would not be the king that would lay his hands on a priest in his territory anymore. And that's this idea of laity. This is the thing that started back in the churches, the 7 churches of Asia Minor that are mentioned. I think 2 churches talk about this, Nicolaitans, and this is the idea that the priests have rule over the people. Laity is the people, and the clergy are the people are above the people. So this idea of a king being a lay investiture, having some sort of authority over the pulpit of the altar of, let's not say the pulpit, let's say the altar of the church parish, was done away with already by this time. So the Pope had centralized all of his power, but the Crusades, he overextended himself. He was talking about this, and the failure of the Crusades really did a lot to undo the vision and the what is it? What do we want to say? The vision and the respect. Maybe they lost all respect. The church lost respect. The Crusades caused the church 2 things. As far as the Roman Church goes, the Crusades, damaged the image of the church. Okay, now the image of the Roman Church is now they don't think that they speak for God anymore. People are questioning it. All right, which is a good thing. People should have a conscience. They have a free volition. That's the other thing. But then it opened the way for business arrangements, and trade, business and trade opportunities. Sort of like the health reform bill is going to do for America. You believe that? I got a little piece of property to sell you down on the waterfront. That's not even funny to anybody in here. Wow. Okay. I guess you're not following that battle. I guess that's my own crusade. Okay. All right. So, all right. So Islam, and really, it's these, the Islam rejected the Christ of the Bible. Christendom was distorting the Bible for its own reason. The Roman authority was distorting the Bible. Christendom was distorting the Bible. Islam rejected the Bible and the Christ of the Bible, although they claimed that Christ is one of their prophets. But both their ideologies, combined religion, they combined politics, they combined conquests with the desire to rule the world. So they sort of checked each other, I guess you could say. That's the idea. They were checking and balancing each other. Islam did not become the supreme authority in the world at that time, and neither did the papal religion, the Pope's religion, become the supreme authority that it could have become. If you think of taking all this territory, if the Pope's religion had become that kind of authority, and the way that the Crusaders ruthlessly, who knows how long the Dark Ages would have lasted. But this thing that God allowed to happen opened the eyes of people. And again, you don't know what the men, once they got to the territory where Jesus was, had been crucified and buried, we don't know what kind of spiritual experiences they may have had there. But they could have, could have been a very powerful one, I'm thinking. And John, let's open the Bible here for this part. We can look in John in chapter 18, Jesus declares something before Pontius Pilate, just before he is crucified. In verse 33, Pilate entered into the judgment hall again and called Jesus and said to him, "Are you the king of the Jews? Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus answered him, "Do you say this thing of yourself, or did others tell it to me? Tell it to you about me." Pilate answered, "Am I a Jew? Your own nation and your chief priests have delivered you unto me. What have you done?" And Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight, that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from hence." Pilate said, "Then you are a king." And Jesus said, "You say that I am a king. To this end I was born, and for this cause I came into the world, that I should bear witness to the truth. Everyone that is of the truth hears my voice." And Pilate says, and I think he says, "What is truth?" I think he says it with a scoff. When he had said this, he went out again to the Jews and said, "I find in him no fault at all." So this is the idea, John 18, 33 to 37. This is the idea. This is really, we could see this. The idea that the Pope is promoting is not an idea that's sourced in the Bible. The idea that this authority that he has governing where he is from his seat in the center of this old Roman decaying empire, it's not something from the Bible. My kingdom is not of this world. So the distortion that was in Christendom, the distortion that was in the authority of the church at that time, the church at that time was checked by the Islamic invasion, okay? And so we can paint this picture throughout, all the way up, really, to our present day. We have always had this sort of, when the church is not exercising its proper authority and recognizing that its kingdom is not of this world, when it's trying to be a worldly force as opposed to being a heavenly force, then God really permits trouble, And communism is the outgrowth of that, I believe. The Civil War in America was, probably the result of churches not standing. Abraham Lincoln said himself in his second inaugural address that the blood of the slaves, the blood of what's being shed in the Civil War, is the right judgment upon America for the blood of the slaves that had been slain or whipped during their time in captivity. And Abraham Lincoln forecast that America might have to pay for 150 years. He said that in his second inaugural address. It may be 150 years that America pays for the 150 years that allowed slavery to exist in its coasts. So, the good thing is that 150 years is almost up, because the Civil War ended in 1865. The Emancipation Proclamation was signed in 1863, I believe it was, by Abraham Lincoln. And so now we're here, it's 2009, 150 years is almost up. Maybe America's almost done paying for its 150 years of slavery. This is Abraham Lincoln's thought, not mine. But anyway, but he said that he thought that, it could be that America will pay for that period of time with the year of trouble. And then even now today we've come back. Communism has died, but now Mohammedanism, Islamism is back on the rise again. So really, the key to any kind of world order is the spiritual authority in local churches. The spiritual authority in local churches is really the key to any kind of world order. The Bible tells us this: when the righteous rejoice, the city rejoices. When the righteous rejoice, the city rejoices. So our key, what is our key in this day and age, in this present evil age? I think it is that we would pray for our pastors, we would pray for our pulpits, and that if our pulpits are secure and they are preaching the Bible, they are leading us in prayer, they are taking us out on the streets to witness to the lost, then these kind of things would become less and less of a problem for us. If my people pray and humble themselves and turn from their wicked ways. It doesn't say anything. So this really takes a lot of things out of our domain, okay? Really, as people of God, there are a lot of things that are out of our domain. I hate homosexuality. I hate abortion. I hate the thing that it does. I understand why it is in the flesh of men, and it's just the natural outgrowth of uncontrolled passion. It happens. But what will solve that uncontrolled passion? Abortion is the result of uncontrolled passion and someone wanting to erase the effects of that. Homosexuality is the result of uncontrolled passion because a man wants to have a new experience or a woman wants to have a new experience. How do we get rid of that? That is an issue for the pulpit and the Bible. Political issues will not solve it. I mean, as honorable as they seem, a political solution is not going to solve the dirtiness that is in the hearts of men. So what is our point and our purpose? We see that the Crusades, as energetic as they were disasters. And we could, a political crusade might be very honorable, and in the case where people are being oppressed, we should do it, with honor, dignity, and civility, in the right way. But to have a crusade that's energized in the exercise of the flesh is going to end up in the same thing that the Crusades. History should teach us something. And history should teach us that the local church is really the foundation of any neighborhood, your local church. And that means that your local pastor needs your prayers. So what's the problem with America? I reduce it to one simple problem. People are not praying for their pastors. That is the simple problem. Their pastors are wicked. That's because people aren't praying that God would keep them from temptation. You mean it's the people's problem that their pastors aren't right? Yes, it's the people's problem that their pastors aren't right. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. It's like I have called, okay, if there is a problem in the pulpit and my pastor, he isn't anywhere close to that, but if there's a problem in his life, then my prayers will bring the Spirit into his room and reveal to him the problem in his life. I don't have to talk about it. I don't have to spread rumors on the internet. I don't have to do anything like that about it. I don't have to bring him up on charges. If I know something about it, I can go to him alone and I can say, in fear and trembling before God, know that I'm weak also. And I can say to him, the real problem is you. And I could do that legally and authoritatively and scripturally. But really, that is the essence of the problem. The problem with all of the world right there at this point in time and at our point in time is our churches. And that's where, are you with me? Are you with me? That's what I'm just saying. It's like that's, and so in my life, I understand that preachers need to pray and preachers need the prayers of their people. So a praying preacher with a praying people is the most powerful force on the planet. And that is the thing that will, subdue enemies. Okay? And so we need that kind of zealousness to come, to really be in our hearts and in our minds at this particular time in the world. Okay, so that zeal really did take off in a number of ways after the Crusades. The people really, there became like a religious zeal that swept through. And again, it wasn't, now remember, what's missing from their lives? What is missing from their lives? The Scriptures. Okay, this is still a fundamental issue. Okay, this is still a fundamental issue. In the 1300s, people will begin to start, William Tyndale will begin to start translating the Bible from the Greek language, the Greek text that Erasmus is an important person. He will translate, he will release a Greek New Testament. And, we'll talk about this in a minute. Let me just say one thing. Religious zeal, there's three things that will begin to happen. The monks, not the monkeys, the monks. Hey, we're the monks. And all we do is get out of town. And some of us are busy singing. Sorry, I just went all the way with that, didn't I? Monks, universities, monks, universities, monks, universities, and monks, universities, and cathedrals. These are things that will. This religious zeal will happen. Erasmus will translate the Greek New Testament. This will become the basis for translation. This will begin to happen. People will begin to get the Bible in their language. The Arminians already have it, and the Arminians you'll see in that territory are still there in that territory, even to this day, I believe. But these three things will happen, and they will be the product of this call for, what do we want to call it? A quest for righteousness. People are recognizing that the Roman way of doing things is not really working. So there will be a quest of righteousness, and monks will rise up, universities will rise up in terms of free thinking, and cathedrals. People will begin building projects. So, all right, let's take another break right now. We'll be back in another 10 minutes, and we'll talk about this part of history.